I wasn't in a generous mood that morning. That's the thing I keep coming back to. If I had been, maybe it wouldn't mean as much. It was a Tuesday in February, the kind of cold that gets through your coat no matter what you do. And I had been at the school since 6:15. Not because I wanted to be. Because my department chair, I'll call him my chair because that's the only title that ever felt accurate for what he was, had scheduled what he called a curriculum alignment meeting for 7 a.m., which meant I had to be there at 6:45 to set up the projector, the handouts, the coffee, all of it, because I was the newest hire, and that's just how it worked. I was 28 years old. I had been teaching 9th grade English at Whitmore Preparatory Academy for 4 months. Before that, I had a graduate degree in literature that took me 3 years and about $40,000. I was still paying back. I had wanted to teach since I was 11, which is either a beautiful thing or a cautionary tale, depending on when you ask me. The meeting lasted 2 hours and accomplished nothing. My chair spent the first 40 minutes explaining why the curriculum framework we had all agreed on in September was being replaced. He did not explain why, he explained the replacement. There is a difference, and I sat at the end of the conference table drinking bad coffee and taking notes on a legal pad, because if I stopped moving my hand, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. By the time I got to the faculty cafeteria, it was 9:20. I had a 40-minute window before my first class. I wasn't hungry, not exactly, but I hadn't eaten since 6 a.m. And my hands were doing that thing where they felt slightly separate from my body, so I got in line and grabbed a yogurt and a banana and a small cup of soup, even though soup before 10 in the morning felt like a personal failure. The line moved slowly. It always did. There was one register open, staffed by a woman named Rosalind who had worked at Whitmore for longer than most of the teachers and who was, genuinely, one of the kindest people I had encountered in that building. She knew everyone's name. She remembered that I didn't like my coffee too hot. She once slipped me an extra roll without charging me when I looked like I'd had a rough week, which I had, and I still think about that. The man in front of me was old, not frail old, not confused old, just old in the way that some people are, where age sits comfortably on them, where they've stopped fighting it. He had a gray overcoat that was slightly too big and a canvas tote bag from some public radio station, and he was ordering a full breakfast, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, orange juice, a cup of decaf. He spoke clearly and thanked Rosalind by name, which meant he'd been here before or she'd introduced herself or both. She rang him up. $12.40. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet, opened it, went still for a second. That specific, quiet stillness that happens when something is wrong and you're calculating whether anyone else has noticed. He checked a second pocket, then the tote bag, then the wallet again. "I'm so sorry," he said to Rosalind. "I think I left my card at home." "I have." He counted what was in his wallet, $7. "I don't know why I did it. I want to say it was instinct, but I've examined that word enough to know it's often just a way of avoiding the less comfortable explanation, which is that sometimes you act before you think, and then you have to live with whatever that reveals about you." I stepped forward and handed Rosalind my card. "I've got it," I said. The man turned to look at me. He had pale blue eyes and the kind of face that looked like it had spent time outdoors, or had once and was remembering it. He said, "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. "Please, I can come back with..." "It's $12, I said. "Please don't worry about it." There was a pause. He looked at me for a moment in a way I couldn't quite read. And then he said thank you, quietly. And I said of course, and Rosalind processed my card, and that was it. I took my tray to a table by the window, ate my yogurt, drank my soup, and by the time I walked into my first class at 10, I had genuinely, completely forgotten about it. The next several weeks were the hardest of that school year, which was saying something because the school year had not been easy. My chair's name was Mr. Devlin. He had been at Whitmore for 22 years and operated on the premise that longevity was indistinguishable from authority, which meant he had a 22-year head start on being certain he was right. He was not a cruel man exactly. He was the kind of man who confused rigor with humiliation, who believed that pressure produced excellence, who had probably been taught that way himself and had never stopped to ask whether the lesson was worth keeping. He had a habit of cold calling teachers in department meetings, not students, teachers. He would stop mid-sentence and turn to whoever was quietest and say, Walk me through your reasoning on the Fitzgerald unit, or what's your retention data looking like for the juniors? And then he would wait with his hands folded on the table while you answered. And if your answer wasn't what he was looking for, he would nod slowly, the way people nod when they're deciding not to say what they actually think, and move on. The first time it happened to me, I froze. Not visibly, I hope, but internally, that specific lurch of your stomach that feels like the floor dropping out from under you. I had been at Whitmore for 6 weeks. I did not yet have retention data. I did not yet know what the Fitzgerald unit was supposed to look like, because I had been told to develop it myself and then separately told I was developing it wrong without being told what right looked like. I answered as best I could. He nodded. He moved on. After the meeting, my colleague, she had the classroom next to mine and had been at Whitmore for 3 years, which made her my closest approximation of a guide, touched my elbow in the hallway and said, "You did fine." He does that to everyone. Does it get better? I asked. She thought about it honestly, which I respected. You get better at it, she said. That was February. By March, I was better at it. By which I mean I had learned to keep a legal pad in front of me at all times, and I had started writing down questions he'd asked in previous meetings so I could prepare for the patterns. And I had developed a specific breathing technique that I used when he called on me that kept my voice level even when I wanted it to shake. I had also started keeping a notebook. Not for school, for myself. It was a small green one I bought at the drugstore for $1.99. I wrote down things I wanted to remember, good questions students asked, moments in class that worked, moments that didn't and why, things I wished someone had told me. It was less a journal than a record, evidence that I was learning something, even when it didn't feel that way. I was in my classroom on a Thursday in late March, eating lunch at my desk because I had papers to grade and no appetite for the cafeteria that day. When there was a knock at my door, it was the school's administrative assistant, not my direct assistant but the one who worked for the office of the head of school. She was in her 60s and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had a manner that was both efficient and oddly reassuring, the way a very competent nurse can make a waiting room feel less frightening, just by existing in it. "Dr. Larkin would like to see you," she said, "when you have a moment this afternoon." Dr. Larkin was the head of school. I had met her once at the orientation in September, when she shook my hand and told me Whitmore was glad to have me, and then moved on to the next person. She was tall and white-haired and had the particular posture of someone who had spent decades walking into rooms where people were arguing and making them stop. I said I had a free period at 2. 2 o'clock then, she said, and left. I did not grade a single paper for the rest of the hour. I ran through every possible version of what this could be, a parent complaint. I had given a student a C- on an essay he had clearly not written himself, and his mother had emailed me twice. A curriculum issue. I had deviated slightly from the department sequence in week 6 because my students were not ready, and I had judged it better to go slower. Something I had said in a meeting. Something I had done. Something I had done. By the time I walked to the main office at 1:58, I had mentally prepared several different versions of the same explanation, none of which felt adequate. Dr. Larkin's office was on the 2nd floor of the main building with a window overlooking the courtyard. She was at her desk when her assistant showed me in, and she stood up when I entered, which surprised me. "Sit down, please," she said. "Thank you for coming." I sat. She sat. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me with an expression that I could not read, and my heart did something complicated. "I want to talk to you about something that happened about 6 weeks ago," she said. She told me that in February, a man named Arthur Whitmore had been in the building for a meeting with the board. He was 81 years old. He was the son of the school's founder, and he had endowed 3 buildings on campus, and he had been quietly involved in the school's governance for longer than most of the current faculty had been alive. He had stepped back from formal board involvement 4 years earlier for health reasons, and he came to campus only occasionally now, without announcement. He had stopped in the cafeteria before his meeting. He had left his card at home. She paused. I think I said something like, "Oh." Or maybe I said nothing. I'm not entirely sure. "He told me about it," she said. "He came to my office after the board meeting and he told me what happened. He said a young woman in the cafeteria line paid for his breakfast without making a fuss about it. He said she handed him back his dignity without making him feel like he'd lost it." She paused again. "He asked me to find out who it was." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, not entirely. I remember looking at my hands and my lap. He wanted me to pass along his gratitude, she said. But she stopped. He made a phone call. I want you to know that this didn't come from me, or from anything I observed, although for what it's worth I have heard very good things from your students. But Arthur made a phone call to someone on the faculty governance committee. He mentioned that he'd like to see certain young teachers at this school better supported. I looked up. There's going to be a formal mentorship program, she said. It was already in discussion, but it's been accelerated. And your name came up for a stipend. It comes from an existing endowment, not from operating budget. And it's meant to support new faculty professional development. She named a number. I will not write the number here because it still makes me feel strange, but it was more than I would have guessed. It doesn't come with strings, she said. It's not conditional on anything, it's just support. For the first years, which are the hardest. I think I said thank you. I think I said it more than once. I'm not sure I said anything coherent. She walked me to the door herself, which she didn't have to do. In the doorway she stopped and said, "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer." I said, "Of course." "Why did you pay for it?" I thought about it. The real answer, the one I actually believed, was that I'd done it because it was $12 and someone needed breakfast, and I happened to be standing there with a card in my hand and enough in my account to cover it. That was the whole of it. There was no calculation. There was no awareness of who he was or what he might do or what any of it might mean. He looked like he was trying not to be embarrassed, I said. And I know what that feels like. She looked at me for a moment. Yes, she said. I imagine you do. I walked back to my classroom on the long way around, through the courtyard, even though it was cold. I needed the air and the extra 4 minutes. I want to be careful about what I say next, because I think this is where the story can go wrong, where it can turn into the wrong kind of lesson, the kind that makes people think kindness is a transaction, that generosity is a strategy, that you should be good to strangers because it might pay off. That is not what I believe. That is not what happened. What I believe is simpler and less tidy. Arthur Whitmore was an old man who had a bad morning, and someone made it slightly less bad, and he happened to be in a position to do something about it, and he did. The kindness traveled in both directions without anyone planning for that. It wasn't a reward system. It was just people doing what they could, when they could. But I also don't want to pretend the money didn't matter. It mattered. It mattered in ways I am still noticing. That first year of teaching is financially brutal in a way that nobody outside of it quite understands. The supplies you buy yourself, the books you buy yourself, the professional development you pay for out of pocket, the years of student loans that do not pause because you chose a profession that society claims to value and demonstrably does not pay. The stipend bought me 6 months of breathing room. It meant I didn't spend the spring doing the math on whether I could afford to stay. I stayed. I am still here. I still have the green notebook. It's full now. I finished it sometime in May of that year. I bought a new one when it was done, same brand, because the habit had become useful and I didn't want to break it. I still write things down. Things I want to remember. Things students say, things that work, things that don't. There's a student I have this year, a 9th grader, quiet, the kind of kid who sits in the back not because he's disengaged, but because he's watching. He asked me a question last week about a short story we were reading, a question so precise and unexpected that I wrote it down in the notebook after class so I wouldn't lose it. He reminded me of myself at that age, that specific brand of intense observation that looks like passivity from the outside and is anything but. After class, I walked out to the hallway with him, toward the stairwell, because I had noticed he always seemed to be navigating the post-class crowd alone. We talked about the story for another 3 minutes. It wasn't a big thing. He probably won't remember it. But I know what it felt like when nobody walked out with me. I know the specific weight of navigating a hallway like you're invisible. Not sure if it's your fault or just the way things are. So you try. You pay what you can when you have it. You walk the long way if it means a few extra minutes of being visible to someone who needs it. You don't do it because you know how it ends. You do it because you know how it starts. With someone standing in a cafeteria line, quietly trying not to lose their footing, and someone else deciding that $12.30 is a small enough price to help them keep it. That's all it was. That's all it needed to be.